this year ICEYE launches more than 25 satellites. So if you think of the sort of scale that we are building towards, it is ramping up, and it's also accelerating, not just linearly, but a little bit exponentially. And what you get with that is that because these type of imaging satellites, you have to operate on low Earth orbits.
Welcome to PEP, the Protect Europe podcast, where we interview founders and investors building the technology that protects Europe's values, way of life, and infrastructure. Join Vesa and myself as we go deep on ICEYE, arguably the most important satellite company in Europe. 100 million in revenue, 1,000 employees. We discuss what it's like to run a growth stage company at scale with Pekka, one of ICEYE's co-founders. Join us. Pekka, huge thank you for joining us on the podcast. Really, really appreciate it. So we're going to dive straight in with the first question. It is 2035. It's 10 years' time. You're still the co-founder of ICEYE. Everything has gone amazingly well. You guys didn't put a foot wrong. Execution was flawless. This is like ideal company world. Where's the company today? Where are you guys in 2035? Just kind of give us that kind of future vision.
Yeah, so in 10 years. So ICEYE is going to be, like, if all goes well, we'll find ourselves in a place where ICEYE is playing in the sort of same category or size category of the Googles and the AWSs of today's world as a kind of like a key vertical of digital infrastructure for the world. And we are sort of seeing that the pillar that has not been built yet, and where we are at best getting to is the ability to provide that sort of infrastructure level reliable access to objective information of what is really happening on the ground, like right now, in a way that you would imagine that there is a system that you put a dot on the map, you have an objective normalized real-time feed of what is actually happening there, and then that's something that is sort of abstracted on a level that ultimately can be integrated into any transaction. So it's abstracted to a level that you're not talking about pixels and measurements, you're talking about objects, so that like any software engineer can integrate a sort of an ability to have a validation truth integrated into any transaction that happens in the world.
Fantastic. So we're bigger than Google and AWS, hopefully.
Could be, or same size, depends, how they do over the next 10 years.
Of course. Yeah. Now look, who knows? Google search, will they make it? But I like the key element there is that vertical integration, that vertical infrastructure place that you guys are in, and then that open opportunity for developers and others to then use that data, use that service. Okay, so that's the future. Let's rewind, sadly, to a rainy Monday in Helsinki when we're recording this. It's 2025. What are you focused on today? What is actually happening in your world today? What have you got to execute on really well to make that 2035 Google AWS vision happen?
Yeah, I guess so ICEYE is now just a little bit over 10 years of a company, and the thing that puts us like nicely smack in the middle of that roadmap to that 10-year vision is that for the last 10 years we've been doubling every year, and that means that you go from the sort of revenue scale of hundreds of thousands to revenue scale of hundreds of millions. And if you only double every year for the next 10 years, then you're at the revenue scale of hundreds of billions, and then ta-da, you've made it. So if you just put us on the smack in the middle of kind of like an exponential curve, and then we find ourselves exactly in the midpoint of the journey. So you only have to double every 10 years. Yeah. So what we have right now is that as is with anything that eventually becomes infra on that level, any sort of deep tech that you're building, pretty typical playbook that hasn't really changed over the last 100 years is that you kind of go first from academia, then to defense, then to sort of larger scale enterprise, insurance, energy, mining, resources, so forth. Then the other mid-sized industries between, then the agriculture and the consumers are there on the very right of that chart. And of course, if you think internet, GPS, these type of sort of like larger scale technologies that very much are considered infra today, maybe that roadmap took 30 years, maybe it took 40 years. Nowadays, of course, if you think of adoption of AI, everything seems to be also squeezing, but it wouldn't be unrealistic to expect that that sort of transition still takes another 10 to 20 years time. But on that playbook, where we find ICEYE today is that we are very much a deep tech operation, that has proven the technology, has the technology in operational use, and very much, in use in the defense world, a little bit in use in that insurance, energy sort of world. But if you think of that roadmap, then we find ourselves right now in the sort of the earlier adopters of that tech right now.
What are the use cases that you personally find most exciting about, and where you see kind of, let's say, the largest midterm potential or impact, whatever?
Yeah. I mean, so if you think of what ICEYE has today, so we have the ability to produce imaging radar coverage or imagery anywhere in the world with a couple of hours response, which is the fastest that you can do, certainly on the unclassified side, and that this sort of capability doesn't really exist practically anywhere else. And so that means that we are a pretty meaningful operator today in this field. And of course, again, in the defense sector, what this means is that now, really for the first time in the world, the sort of transition from satellite coverage being strategic intel, it starts to move into operational tactical ISR, and then all the way to essentially targeting. So kind of being able to move the doctrinal place where technology like this is used in the defense spectrum. I think this is the one of the most interesting things where we are working on today, because that's of course not just a question of the performance of the technology, but it's also kind of working with the end users in a place where you are kind of also building and sort of together developing the kind of how does a modern European space force alongside a modern European air force and ground force operate in a way that the tie-in kind of doctrinally becomes, yes, very much capabilities are relevant for the strategic intel, but then also becomes something that can be effectively used in the sort of operational tactical ISR domain in a way that we have seen how drones are being used on super low echelons to provide kind of local real-time ISR in that local real-time area of operation, which may be a matter of hundreds of meters or kilometers. But then when you need to go any further from there, then how do you tie in the use of satellites into something that becomes still usable by the kind of actual fighting force on the ground. So this is something that at least myself, I've gotten pretty heavily involved in, which is an exciting.
No, that's really cool. And just give people a kind of sense of scale. Obviously, at the moment, how many satellites roughly do you guys have up? Yeah. And then ultimately, if SpaceX plays nicely, how many more satellites will we have in the next few years? And really, is it a kind of Metcalfe's law network effect? The more satellites, more coverage, exponential growth? Break down some numbers for us.
Yeah. So today ICEYE has launched 54 satellites, and again, the sort of roadmap of roughly doubling every year actually is true here. That so far, always roughly half of our satellites have been launched the last year, which is again true. This year ICEYE launches more than 25 satellites. So if you think of the sort of scale that we are building towards, it is ramping up, and it's also accelerating, not just linearly, but a little bit exponentially. And what you get with that is that, and because these type of imaging satellites, you have to operate on low Earth orbits, meaning that you will go around the world somewhere in the order of 90 minutes, 1.5 hours. And then you kind of let the Earth rotate underneath you. You know, what happens is that the only way how you can be somewhere fast or kind of everywhere at once is for you to have a lot of satellites, and there really isn't any other kind of physical way to, like, you can build as great of a satellite as you ever want, but like, you know, it's not going to give you real-time coverage unless you have a lot of them. And then what is a lot now, you know, when we are operating this sort of high tens, then, you know, this yields kind of response times of, you know, a couple of hours. You know, you can roughly measure the response times in hours in this case. And then when you move to like the magnitudes of hundreds, then you start measuring the response times in minutes. And you know, then, you know, why you're seeing Starlink being 10,000 satellites is because, you know, if you want literally continuously to be over horizon with multiple satellites at any given point in the world, those are the sort of numbers that you're talking about. And it's not necessarily wrong to say that, like, you know, that is a possible end state for ICEYE as well. That, like, if you actually wanted to be able to on command enable a second by second video feed, you know, you'd be talking about thousands and thousands of satellites. Now, when we think of this, and we tend to think of it like this, that there is of course a place where then it may be that you want to change the platform technology that you want to operate on, you know, stratospheric drones or something like this, when you go into like second by second real time, you know, especially on metropolitan areas, just because, you know, they are very fixed and in actually quite small areas, whereas then the sort of satellite reaction time is something that, you know, is true for everywhere in the world at once.
I'm curious about the kind of economics. Like, let's say if you 10x the number of satellites, or x, like, how much kind of lower price point you would get? Like, is there a sort of an economic scale to be obtained?
Honestly, not that much. Like, I think it goes a little bit the other way around. That, like, the design cycle of, like, of course, you know, like, why is ICEYE so vertically integrated as we are? Why did we have to start from sort of transistor level up in design of the radar imaging sensor? It kind of has to do with the original fact that it was not going to be feasible at all to be operating, you know, any type of, you know, 10, let alone hundreds of a constellation on a sort of any sort of commercially feasible basis if you had to rely on the way how it was done before. That, you know, we had to take the approach of okay, so we need like a magnitude jump in sort of cost efficiency for this sort of generally, like, you know, as a business case to make sense. And that was really the origin story of ICEYE, of, you know, trying to figure out, is it possible to be building specifically synthetic aperture radar imaging in this type of high resolution way, done in the kind of new space methodology. And then that's kind of the original core IP of ICEYE, which then in a way sets the economy of scale for us, is that, like, you know, then when we build it on top of this technology, then we can, you know, build it in a sort of cost efficiency scale that makes sense. And now, of course, we are not stopping here. You know, if you think of us having become the place where it happens in terms of SAR imaging from space, then, you know, right now our engineering team is quite a lot bigger than it was when we started. So of course the technology is moving forward, and then that means that, like, you know, we will be able to make the cost efficiency to be higher. Right now, that, honestly speaking, isn't like the key focus. Right now we are sort of, you know, thinking of it like this, that especially in the defense user space, that the fact that, like, we can deliver fast and we can deliver these high performance systems and we can deliver them still in a kind of like category that is sort of budgetary wise sensible for a mid-sized European nation. It actually, you know, currently still puts us, you know, in a sort of a, say, category of one, you know, in terms of player, you know, with performance that we can deliver in the next 2, 3, 4 years. Because I mean, of course, eventually all the technology tends to catch up, that, like, just about any major prime, you know, could promise to deliver in 5 or 10 years, but then, you know, where we have a very unique window to serve, you know, with the current technology and the current manufacturing space, the pace that we have is the kind of the current set of crises that when you're thinking of the ramp up of capabilities that are considered quite necessary, just to be prepared over the next 12, 24, 36 months, then this is a place where, ICEYE very much is a pretty unique player.
Oh, I think you're in a really interestingly unique space. But just let's give some numbers to this. So how big's the kind of team today? So roughly, and also talk through kind of the numbers in the different kind of departments, as it were. And obviously you've got a big presence here in Finland, but you've probably got lots of other people elsewhere in the world.
Yeah.
And then maybe as a second part, maybe also explain the kind of the brief journey of a satellite from where does it start life, and then at some point probably goes to America, SpaceX, chuck it up, etc. But then when does it come down, right? Because these things don't really last forever. So it's really first part's team and where they are, and the second part is like journey of a satellite.
That's fair. So the ICEYE team is inching closer to be 1,000 people worldwide. We're not exactly there yet, short of somewhere between 800 and 900 total heads right now. Roughly half of that is in Finland. The Finnish team is a little less than 400 people right now. And then the rest is a couple of big sites around the world. So the team in US, so we have a cleared subsidiary in US operating in California, where we can fly a fleet that commercially can serve the US DoD customers. And then we have big teams in Warsaw and in Poland, and then a couple of smaller engineering sites in Spain and in Greece and so forth. Then we are building up our presence in Japan quite heavily with sort of engineering manufacturing lines there. So and a couple of other kind of key customer locations, where sort of strategic presence is building up. We just announced the JV setting up major production facility in Germany with Rheinmetall. So like these type of actions, they are making us a kind of very globally distributed team. And then again, like in the current environment of doing defense business, actually the sort of strategic depth that you can get out of being globally distributed, and then of course operating assets in space. That means that like all of your kind of key infrastructure is sort of already redundant and then pretty mobile, and then you have sites to work with. So you're never reliant on a single site in a setup like this. And the team distribution roughly is that beyond the geographical distribution, roughly half of our staff is in the engineering organizations around let's say researching, developing, delivering the product. Of course, like what makes the staff quite large is that we do super deep vertical integration, meaning that like we have the sort of best in the world teams around radio engineering, electronics engineering, mechanical engineering, deep embedded software all the way on VHDL, sort of like kind of FPGA boards, to sort of a maybe more traditional firmware, and then software, you go the abstraction layers all the way up to, the web front ends, and then everything. So that just makes the team overall quite large. And then we have assembly mostly in-house for just about every subsystem, and then for sure the real satellites, are assembled by our own team. So that just makes a lot of staff that otherwise maybe in a different type of a company would be living outside the company, but we have wanted to bring the kind of the full key vertical chain actually in-house, and for us it's really working. As far as the how does the satellite get made, I think if you think from sort of really absolute nothing, if you think of a situation where you have no orders in place and then no launches booked, then you're talking about lead times of maybe you want to be looking at the launch and some of the like the longest lead time component subsystems in a sort of a 18 months style timelines, especially if you're looking at the ride shares these days. The let's say the window of a booking it's actually quite far out. Now, of course, for ICEYE of today, that's not exactly the situation, because we're dealing with a kind of a rolling buffer of capabilities that we try to push the decisions as late as possible, but at the same time kind of keep a scaling capacity available for ourselves. Like we have a little bit enough of a scale to be able to shape the market to look like the way we need it to. The actual sort of build phase of a satellite, if you think that, we're making 25 plus satellites this year, that means that there's less than 2 weeks per satellites to be done. If you do all of them in series, of course, we do them, in parallel as well. But gives you a scale that an individual satellite cannot really spend years on the factory floor. It can spend at maximum months. So currently the sort of empirical schedule, if you look back, has been that, roughly every quarter there is one rocket that goes up, and roughly, each rocket ends up having 4 or 5 satellites from us on it right now. And that just, has made it look like a sort of a nice schedule that you're not literally all the time launching, you have, some spacing in between, but at the same time, the next hardware version or hardware deployment is all the time like very close in the horizon. So like if you need to try something new, fix something old, so like that iteration cycle is continuously ongoing. And right now, of course, like a lot of those systems that we launch, we are actually launching for our kind of sovereign customers, meaning that these become actually sort of systems deliveries. So then again, like that pace gives us, some leeway of movement in terms of like, how we allow some customers to take advantage of the fact that we already have a production line, and then we can shuffle things a little bit for them, kind of comparative to having to kind of start a program from scratch and then deliver in 3 years or 4 years, but rather roll the kind of sequence much earlier and be able to ramp up the capabilities for those customers. And a lot of the testing actually, like we have brought that in house as well. So like in our kind of main facilities, we have most of those sort of large testing facilities in house as well. To be able to kind of do that full build phase in our own floors. Again, like just strictly from the timing point of view, that if you had to rely on a third party, then if a week goes by, it's actually a little bit critical, and we certainly have the volumes to cover for those investments. And then we put the satellites in a box when we feel like they're ready, and then they go into a truck. The truck goes to an airplane goes to Florida or California, where the SpaceX launch sites are, and then we integrate to the final stage of the rocket. Not that much else happens in the launch site. Like we of course validate that the satellite is functional still after the transport. But what you can do in the launch site post integration is you can charge batteries, and that's it. So the time when we actually start interacting with the satellite actually happens via the ground station network back in our satellite operations. So in that sense, if there are kind of exciting and critical moments in the satellite's life, it doesn't really happen on the launch site, but it happens back in the control room, if you will. I
like that, exciting and critical.
Yeah.
Hopefully not too much excitement.
Well, but this is the thing. Like it's really funny. Like I have a couple of these sort of video recordings of our own team, from the different years of the company when you saw the first satellite being launched. You had like literally the entire company in a single room. Whoa, screaming and clapping. Nowadays, like I remember like one of the launches in the summer when they were just happened to happen in like Finnish nighttime, and then we had like the early operations team at the office as we do. It's like 5 people, and then those guys like the rocket goes up, and like you get like approximately 1 clap per 1 satellite, just because there happened to be 5 satellites on that launch, and then you got like 5 claps at it. That's like, yeah, whoa.
Oh my gosh.
So I mean, these things do become routine. Like, of course, it doesn't make them any less cool and any less exciting. But when you got a team that does this day in and out, and becomes very good at it, and then they do.
Absolutely, I think that's perfect.
Have you witnessed on site the rocket launch?
No, I have not. This is actually true for most of the team. Again, like back to the point that like most of the critical activity just doesn't happen there on the launch site. Like the only thing you can do on the launch site is watch. So one day maybe when we are having some major customer VIP who wants to go see the launch will go with them. But that's basically like, from my point of view, would sort of signal practical retirement from the from the real action, if you will, if I was there on the launch side.
No, that makes perfect sense. And then just almost towards the end, but just ask a couple of questions. What's the kind of bottlenecks on your growth? Because at the moment you're like, they're doing the double. Fantastic. What's kind of the limiting factors on the business today? Is it, number of sovereign, small, medium-sized European countries prepared to buy this? Is it literally SpaceX's schedule? Is it, what is it, the number of, I don't know, hardcore researchers that you can get to build these things? Is it some GPU thing in the background? What's kind of limiting it at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, of course, the thing about engineering is that if the bottleneck is staying in the same place, then you're doing something wrong. That of course we hope, and we do see the bottleneck shifting places. And I mean, at least I would hope that we don't end up literally doubling the personnel every year anymore. There was many years where that was actually absolutely the truth. But of course, now in this type of scale, you would imagine that some degree of network effects actually do come out of the staff, and vice versa. Then the sort of the friction that you end up experiencing just by doubling the organization, like in these scales, of course that's a non-negligible, that the actual efficiency you get out of on a macro level from a single person starts to diminish, of course. So in that sense, there is we're certainly trying to make it so that the bottleneck for growing the performance of the system or the performance of the business doesn't become the sort of same linear scaling per person, but we can let's say accelerate on this. It's you kind of always find that a limiting factor to kind of instantaneous growth in an industry like this is the fact that of course everything that is physical does need different type of deployment times than things that are purely software. So if I decided today that I'm going to need 200 more satellites, no amount of money can translate that for me for tomorrow. Now of course a gigantic quantity of money could get me to do that in 12 months, but it would be very, very hard for there isn't a team that could do that in 3 months. So just because there are kind of very physical constraints around the components, the supply chains, the getting rockets and so forth. So that means that a lot of the scaling, that sort of let's say fan of different type of scenarios that you're planning for, you kind of have to be forward leaning, but not too forward leaning, because of course then the sort of existential problem of a company is that if you over deploy your resources and you don't then have any capital, then the company is bankrupt. So there's that play that always happens. When we're looking at a couple of years out, then we are making targeted and a little bit forward leaning sort of scale decisions, but it just makes it practically quite hard to respond into say there's a rapid peak demand increase in the next 4 months. These are actually quite hard to
No, you don't have much flex in the system. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
okay,
we are the fastest in the world in doing this, but it's still not as fast as the demand the market is.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Okay, so last question from ours. So you are one of the leading builders in this kind of protect Europe space. Who do you admire? Who else is doing an amazing job? Whether they're a founder or whether they're an investor or just a company, who's worth a shout out?
Yeah, I mean, lately it has sort of I've become very impressed in how the sort of local Ukrainian tech industry has spun itself up in a kind of pure wartime in environment, and sort of the scales are kind of properly stunning in a way that if you think of the scale of how the drone warfare there looks like, I don't think anybody else in the sort of the world has those sort of scales in their practical day-to-day lives. Like, you're talking literally making of millions of drones into the battlefield. And then sort of having an industry like this, it's not something that really exists anywhere else, and maybe in China today.
But even Ukraine is doing drone construction component costs lower than China, and no one thought that was even possible. Like, beating China on construction cost is kind of something that people have not been able to do for 30
years.
And it needs to be done in a really kind of distributed way, because you just cannot put all the drone production in one or a few places, but you need to be like really distributed. That's kind of a part of the problem.
So one of the like the really impressive teams that has been reported on is this Skyfall team over there. That it's something that is actually quite hard to comprehend, unless you have been there in the field. And then suddenly, if you're there in the field, it becomes like, of course it is like this, and it is like the most normal thing that you need to do, because otherwise you don't survive. And there is quite a major gap there. If you're talking about specifically protecting Europe and the sort of new defense industry, that's where certainly the leaders right now are over there, and it's an area where every single country will have to pick it up.
Yeah, very much so. Look, Pekka, that was a great shout out. I think Team Ukraine is doing an amazing job, and Skyfall particularly, will definitely get them on the podcast. Huge thank you for your time today. We came into this podcast as big ICEYE fans, and we've come out of the other side of the podcast probably even more fanboy than we were when we went in. So you've done a great job on that side. And it's fantastic to see a company with this sort of reputation delivering really great value in Europe. Yeah, I don't think many people appreciated how big you guys are today, and the fact that you're going to double each year. Double thumbs up. So look, huge thank you. Thank you very much for your time today. And we wish you the best of luck. And I think you're going to do a great job.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. To make sure you catch us again, please follow us on your favorite podcasting platform.